Dom and Johnny in the morning. All right, so today's question was posed to us by Eric, and we actually, in our conversation with him last week, not recorded, just like casual conversation. A bunch of other questions kind of came up that I thought would help illuminate the answer to the topic, which is, how often should you train a week?
This is a highly personal question.
Yep.
So my answer is probably going to be very different than Master John's. But yeah, it really comes down to what you're looking to get out of the martial arts. Mm-hmm. So Master John Fritz used to always say that the art is here to serve you. You are not here to serve the art. So depending on if you're just here for the social experience, which is a super valid reason to do martial arts.
Yeah.
You get to hang out with, people that you enjoy, you know, and do something physical, stay a little bit healthy, get better at self-defense, but, really you're just here to, have fun and hang out. Super valid reason. And a lot of people do martial arts for that. I think that's why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is so popular, because it's got that, gym bro attitude.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of gym bros in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But yeah, you get to go, you get to give your bros prolonged hugs on the mats. It's... But no, besides, I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think a lot of people that are here, even for different reasons, still come here for that part too. But yeah, if that's the only thing you're here for, training, once or twice a week on the mats, that's enough. Come here and have fun and do your best. Will you progress super fast? Maybe not, but, it doesn't matter, if that's not your aim. And that's totally cool. If you want to be a tournament competitor, a really skilled tournament competitor, that's a different story.
Yeah.
That requires a lot of gym time, and then it requires a lot of home time. Mm-hmm. And then everywhere in between, I used to really like the tournament scene, and I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm starting to feel ready to transition out of it, when I'm allowed to. But at the same time, I still, I love martial arts for the self-defense aspect of it. I'm still here. I love the social, and I love how it's changed me as a human being on an emotional, physical, and spiritual level. But the self-defense was what drew me into the martial arts in the first place, along with the coolness factor.
Yeah.
So I train 6 or 7 days a week consistently. And I think that will always be how I approach it, but mainly because that's my aim. So I guess it depends on what you're looking for. I guess, John, I'm actually curious to know your answer to this question. Because I know you were kind of bred into the martial arts. You've been here forever.
Yeah, so I think largely it's the same answer as you. It has a lot to do with why you're training and what your goals are. I think that for the self-defense aspect, you can do a lot with once a week. I think that a lot of it comes down to just more your mindset than necessarily your physicality. And what I mean by that is we've both, I'm sure, heard horror stories of people who have trained in the martial arts, but in an actual situation, their mentality didn't click on, so they ended up, getting hurt. Whereas, you also hear stories of people who have not had a lot of training, but they've trained the mindset enough that even with limited training, they're able to do enough to be able to get away safely. That's not to say that more training doesn't yield to greater skill efficiency, but it is kind of amazing, what our body remembers without needing a whole lot, as long as, we train the right mindset. So that being said, I find that for most people, a good average is about twice a week. especially since we've talked about our style being so curriculum heavy. There's just a lot to remember that oftentimes if if it's like you're learning a kata and you come in the first time in a week and you learn a new piece or whatever, or get new advice on how to refine it, and then you come back a second time in the week to make sure, so your instructor can make sure that you're practicing it correctly and that there wasn't miscommunication between like what you were supposed to strengthen or whatever. I find that tends to be a sweet spot for most people. Again, though, they're not like tournament competitors. They're not MMA fighters. They're doing it for the social element, but I do think there is like a huge, even that twice a week, there's a huge jump in how quickly you can progress versus someone who comes once a week. So I think it's more the consistency than the amount, because I've also definitely had students where over a 3-month period, they show up like 4 or 5 times a week, and then life gets in the way for the next 3 months. It's a lot of catch up when they come back. Like doing a lot and then nothing, and then a lot and then nothing is a lot less efficient than doing a little less but consistently. I do think that twice a week I have found on average to be the sweet spot for most people. But then again, there's why are you training? Like it always comes back to that. So how do we define training? So I think one of the assumptions we're making is that training means on the mat in a class with an instructor watching you. But that doesn't have to be what training is. I mean, you mentioned training at home. Mm-hmm. Like I just remember a student telling me that when they started training 5 minutes a day, their art got exponentially better. And that's not a long time investment. We're talking, 35 minutes a week if you add it up, 5 minutes a day, 7 days a week, on top of your group classes. So I don't think it takes a lot to make a really big difference. But that being said, especially if, you're doing like the MMA thing or it's a tournament competition, you can train 2 to 4 hours a day, I think, to really get ready for an event like that, knowing that you're training for a specific event. I think that people who train like that, they don't train like that all of the time. They have their consistency rhythm, but then they ramp it up leading up to something. And then on the other side of that, there is some recovery to make sure that they can, be healthy for another event later on.
Yeah, no, and actually that's a super good point. Master Dave Shirley used to say, practice doesn't make perfect. Mm-hmm. Perfect practice makes perfect. And if you're training with no aim, then I think you're absolutely right. And I think when you train with that purpose in mind, if you train, it's like I am training specifically for this point, so I will do it this way because of this. I think you're absolutely right. You get a ton more of that, those focused gains out of it. I have, and to attest what you said, I have 2 students in Marlboro, and they're brothers, and they're both once a week. And I wish they did more, but just what they have going on, once a week is what they can do. I gave them the video for One Pinion with Master Jenny, and one of them practices it every single day. Yeah. And we are now getting close to testing time, and one of them looks phenomenal. Yeah. And the other one can't remember One Pinion. And we have had to make the hard choice. And of course, those gateways help. Mm-hmm. For anyone out there who doesn't know what a gateway is, it's almost like a report card. Yeah. Kind of like a mini test before a test, just to let us know that you're ready to take the step into a new section of training, for instance, beginner to intermediate, and which would be the case for orange to purple. So those, I'm still going to run them with both, but I already know, as more like when you teach long enough, you already know what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is one of them is going to test, the younger of the 2 brothers, mm-hmm. and the other one is not. And that could be on the surface, you could be like, oh, that's kind of sad. But the 2 brothers may also just have different ideas of what they want to get out of the martial arts anyways. So the other brother, we kind of had this talk with him a couple weeks ago. about, where they're heading. And, one brother clearly is ready to move up, and, just what the other brother would have to do to kind of get on the same level. And he doesn't seem to mind not moving up. So it's not on us to say, it's not on us to feel bad,
right?
Because he doesn't feel bad. This is not something he likes to be in karate. I think that's where his friends are. He gets a workout. He enjoys it. He's moving. He's progressing, but he doesn't care to progress quite as fast as his brother. He doesn't, the working after karate to move faster through the martial arts is just not on his priority list. And this is just super cool, But yeah, the other brother's going to test.
Yeah, well, and I think that reminds me of a frame that we've been using recently, especially with our black belt students, but I think that this is a great example of it, which is the 3 paths of training. So in ascending order of intensity, we have a path of recovery, a path of integration, and a path of progression. And the path of recovery means that there's been some kind of injury, which may or may not be physical, that you are recovering from. So, for example, there was, if a student took, say a nasty fall, like they were working out and there was something where, they got taken down super hard and they're just scared to fall. Like, the path of recovery is figuring out how to overcome the fear of getting taken down so that you can train effectively. Because the reality, like we've talked about, is if you can't fall hard, you are actually putting yourself at greater risk of injury because you're not practicing how to take an impact. It's okay every now and then. In fact, we actually, side story, there was another student who hates sparring. Like, just the idea of it really frightens her. She doesn't like even the idea of getting popped in the nose, even by accident. Totally fair.
Yeah.
And the conversation was, you don't have to do sparring this week. This is a new thing. We understand that. And the next sparring week, we're going to have you pick a friend that you trust to go light with and also spar. Because it's like the Karate Kid 3, you must not lose to fear. And it's going to be part of her black belt test. So rather than try to shove her into a skill that she hasn't been practicing, how do you just ease off the gas a little bit so that way she can recover from her, she can recover her relationship with sparring or falling or whatever it might be. The path of integration, it sounds like what the student is, which is you're doing the martial arts as a way to better your own life, whether it's socially, physically, whatever, and you have no interest in progression. Now, that being said, I do think there's a tipping point where you can't integrate anymore without progression, and especially for students who are black belts, this comes back to, how do we define training? So, Ken would say that an intense conversation is a type of sparring match. And a lot of the same strategies and tactics you may use in the physical ring, you may find to apply in a negotiation or a debate or anything like that. So that it's still training in a way. It might not be the physical training, but you're still using the same skill set in another way. And then the path of progression, that's you're putting in extra effort in order to progress your skill. So you're not trying to maintain where you're at. You're trying to get better. And the reality is the only way you do that is with more of the right kind of training, which also may mean not too much of the physical training. Because there is a point where you do too much, your body breaks down, and you might be in the path of progression, and you may fall off into the path of recovery because you push too hard. So it's the hard thing, which is it's Goldilocks. You can't have too little practice, but you also can't have too much to the point that you're hurting yourself, which makes it so you can't do anymore. And it's really tough to figure out, and it's usually never the same answer for everybody even in the same season of their life, So I think that's what makes this question kind of tricky, because it's so contextual and there's so many things you have to kind of factor in when you're searching for the answer.
Yeah, and especially, at the lower ranks. I think I think we get spoiled at the upper ranks because, you know, when we really start to push ourselves. So like when I'm doing a workout, and especially when forms are involved in this workout, and maybe I'm hitting the bag, then doing push-ups, then doing a set of forms, then bag, sit-ups, push-ups, set of forms. You know, by the time I get to the black belt forms, I am just wiped.
Yeah.
But then, you know, that's where forms like Invincible Wall shine. You know, when you're just tired and you're heavy, and all of a sudden, you know, but a lot of times, especially if you're practicing those karate forms, like they just get sloppy, and then it's like what Master Charlie was saying, you know, perfect practice makes perfect. So if you're just doing the form for the sake of doing the form, but you can't do it correctly, you're almost backtracking.
Right.
You know, so yeah.
Yeah, I think there's another dimension to this too that I think is interesting and very relevant, which is sometimes the best training is teaching, which is why, you know, blue belt is the first rank where we let people dip their toes into the instructor training pathway if it's appropriate, or a student team of role models. When you teach somebody else a technique or a kata, you have to unpack it in a much different way than you're used to. So it'd be like the difference between, you know, driving a new car, right, where you don't really have to know how the engine works. You don't really have to know all the bells and whistles. You just need gas pedal, steering wheel, you know, how to shift gears if it's a manual. But if you're teaching somebody else how to drive, there's a lot more that goes into it that we often take for granted. And when we start to help somebody else unpack it, it helps us in turn be able to unpack it for ourselves. So, you know, that's where I think the most learning I've ever had has happened, is teaching it to somebody else. So if you count that as training, now all of a sudden, let's say you take 2 group classes a week and you know, help in an instructor capacity a 3rd class. That 3rd class may be worth like 2 or 3 classes by itself. Like the gains you get in terms of knowledge and skill are kind of exponential.
Yeah, I think it kind of connects everything. It ends up being the glue between knowledge and, you know, the physical prowess of the art. You know, it's that's always helped me.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I have a lot of oh yeah moments or aha moments. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
well,
like, huh.
And especially when you're like at least a black belt, like I would tell Ken often that because he would sometimes come out to teach a black belt class, and then we'd have an under black belt adult class afterwards. So he would, you know, do a lesson with the black belts, and then I'd watch him teach like yellow belt material, and I would often tell him I'm learning a lot more watching how he's unpacking and helping yellow belts digest new movements way more so than what the black belts are doing. So not that I didn't find that helpful, and also like there's just something with you have like a greater appreciation for the skills that are built at lower ranks, because ideally that's when you're actually getting the most growth, is, you know, having someone who knows nothing into someone that knows how to palm heel someone in the nose. That's way bigger growth than, like, you know, making sure that your front kick is at like a 30-degree angle versus a 33-degree, you know, those minor adjustments that we can appreciate at our level, but they're micro adjustments in the grand scheme of things. I think from like a self-defense standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How you practice makes the same thing like 12 or 15 other different things. So a really good example from like a weightlifting perspective would be like a bicep curl. The mechanics of a bicep curl are one way, but, you know, if you're trying to do it at like a normal pace versus trying to slow down the movement, those are 2 very different ways, and give you 2 very different benefits for the same type of motion. You know, so practicing fast, practicing slow, practicing in different environments. I think we've talked about that before. In a dojo is very different than outside with your shoes on. Do you have any like fun way that you like to practice?
Yeah. So I always like to mix it up. So my weeks I am a creature of habit, but I try and space out my days. So I do the same thing just about every week. Just like I eat the same breakfast every day. I've always been like that, so, but on Mondays, before classes, I do my own workout. It's usually 45 minutes to an hour, and it is bag work, push-ups, sit-ups, and forms, and I rotate through. So I start with bag work, and then I'll do 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, and then I'll go and I'll run all my karate forms. Then I'll go back on the bag and I'll run some other set, and I'll usually have a couple sets I'll run, whether it be like, jab cross into a roundhouse kick, then switch my feet and hit with a roundhouse kick on the other leg, stuff like that. Just, little things that, like sparring drills or fighting drills, something that's not just random punches and kicks. There's like something to it, like something I want to train. And then I do another set of, 50 pushes, 50 sit-ups, and then my katas, and then I do it one more time for the black belt forms. So and then I teach all day. And then on Tuesdays, I'm here podcasting.
Yeah.
Which is, always, it's like a training the mind. 'Cause
Yeah.
I learn a lot from this, from you, John.
Thanks.
Hearing your side, because, my brain is always formulating all these, things, and then all of a sudden your input like derails, at least a fourth of them, and all of a sudden it just creates new thoughts, and so I really value this time as part of my training.
Yeah.
And then after this, when as long as we have time, you and I usually work out.
Yep.
And do more of the perishable skill stuff, so reaction and timing, which is super important, especially if you want to be either an effective fighter or an effective point fighter.
Or an effective teacher, because I really believe that for the most part, you should be expected to do the things that you want your students to do. There are obvious exceptions. So, for example, I know an instructor that had a pretty traumatic knee injury. Not going to expect them to be able to like jump around the same way a kid would. That's understandable, but for the most part, you gotta like keep those perishable skills sharp, especially so that you can model for your students, because that's how they're gonna learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. Tuesday nights, jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I have my jiu-jitsu class. I absolutely, I love it. It is like a deviation from what we do, and it is a nice break. So I get to see, interesting, Master Freddie LePan. I got to have a nice little conversation with him at the clinic he did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we got talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he asked me why I trained it, and I asked him why he trained it, and we both kind of had the same reason. He was like, you can't beat what you don't understand.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, his whole purpose for training in those arts was so that he could develop his art to be able to trump it.
Well, that's at least one of the legends I heard about why we have a focus of kicking in our art. Is, Fred Villari was meeting with a lot of different martial artists. These Taekwondo guys came in, were literally kicking everybody's butt. And so he started learning kicking so that he could learn how to counter it, and also ended up liking a lot of it. So I don't know how true that legend is, but that is one legend I have heard a few times from a few different people. So
yeah. And what's interesting is a lot of Kempo practitioners, depending on the art, tend to keep the kicks very low. And even Master Vlar would say it sometimes.
Yeah.
But this is also the dude who could like kick someone to the floor from their chest because he could somehow produce downward force with a front kick. Because I don't know if you ever saw that video with him and Master Boise, and he's kicking him like right above the belt, but he's like hitting him downward, and it keeps collapsing his knees, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'd have to watch it to figure out what the mechanics are.
So he was just one of a kind.
Right.
Lost my train of thought. So Wednesdays I do the same thing as Mondays. Thursdays, I usually relax a little bit. I still teach. Oh, actually, Wednesday nights, I have a class, too. It's either with Master Bob Collins or Master Rob Whitney, which is a very cool experience. And then Fridays, I come in, usually here, have a lesson with Master Ken, get to work out with the instructors, and then, that's pretty much my week.
Yeah. I don't have as predictable a thing as that. A lot of it has to do with where I'm driving or the shifting circumstances of where I have to be, which I don't think is a bad thing either, because one of the things, especially from the martial arts training perspective, is the best analog is something called exercise snacking, where if you can't sit down for like 30 minutes to do something, you find like 6 pockets of 5 minutes to just train stuff. And I think one of the benefits to that is you work something really intensely for 5 minutes, and then like you let your body settle, like a rest in between sets, and then you kind of go for it again. I end up doing a lot of just the more conditioning type training at home as opposed to the dojo, because it's actually just really interesting, like just the way our mats are and stuff. Like I don't like having weights out here. So I have a lot of like the dumbbells and stuff at home. I find that yoga is the other big. That was a huge boost when I do that regularly, which I say when because I have not been. But it really is. It's interesting. Not necessarily that a lot of yoga practitioners I've met, which I don't even know if it's a majority. It's just the ones I've happened to meet kind of go for the more spiritual side. Whereas I just find that the spiritual side happens anyway with just the physicality. So I don't need to imagine myself as the drop in the ocean. I just need to get these hips working right. And a lot of times, I think kind of like how you can change your definition of training, like the definition of self-defense can be a little fluid too. So there's the obvious one, which is someone attacks you and can you protect yourself? But, I brought it up before, but how to slow down your aging that's preventing you from doing things. That is a type of protecting, that's a way of protecting yourself. Slapping out is awesome self-defense because, even if...
self-defense against the floor.
Exactly, yeah, or gravity. Like, your environment is trying to hit you, how do you disperse it? So, I think in terms of, my type of practice, a lot of it is more focused on the body conditioning as opposed to, because I get a lot of the martial arts stuff pretty regularly anyway. Man,
you know what, Master Ken is a great example. I think that's why where we are the way we are, but he's in the best shape of his life.
Yeah.
In his upper 50s.
Yeah, and he's getting only more in shape, which I find to be incredibly motivating.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So in that, I feel like I'm in the best shape of my life, even though injuries take longer to heal.
Yeah.
But besides that, I feel stronger than I ever have, and that's kind of cool. And yeah, it is part of self-defense. Every member of my household got pretty sick recently, except me. And it's those little things. Training.
Dom and Johnny in the morning.